Hey, hello everyone. It's great to be back in Taiwan and here at ABS, and thank you, Andrew, for inviting me to speak to you. So I'll be talking to you about Bitcoin today. It's a good timing because we're down, but that makes it more fun, right? So my topic is nation-state Bitcoin adoption from El Salvador to the world. So if you don't know me, my name is Samson Mow. I'm the CEO of Jan3. I helped El Salvador design and announce their Bitcoin bonds. Previously, I was the CSO at Blockstream, a Bitcoin infrastructure company. Before that, I was at BTC China, which is a Bitcoin exchange and mining pool back in the day, one of the largest in the world. And I'm also a game developer professionally and by trade, but that was another life. So Jan3, this is the company I founded after leaving Blockstream. I wanted to focus more on Bitcoin adoption throughout the world. So I gathered some people together and we launched this company. And it is a Bitcoin technology company focused on delivering Bitcoin and access to financial freedom to people around the world. And our mission is accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization. So that is simply when everyone moves to a Bitcoin standard and they don't need to move back to using fiat money. They just stay in Bitcoin. So what Jan3 does is twofold. The first part is nation-state Bitcoin adoption. We're known as the nation-state Bitcoin adoption company. So we've done a number of announcements and helped a number of countries, regions, special economic zones launch their own Bitcoin strategies. So there's the president of Madeira. It's an autonomous region of Portugal. We met with senators and members of parliament in Colombia, Mexico. We met with the prime minister of Montenegro. We met with 4 running candidates for the US election, Robert Kennedy Jr. I met with President Gustavo Petro from Colombia and a number more. So this is a core part of our mission. We also developed the Aqua wallet, which is a Bitcoin and Bitcoin Layer 2 wallet that also supports stablecoins such as Tether. And this is a key part of our strategy to onboard people from the bottom up, launching this and focusing in on Latin America and the global south. So right now, people are seeking out dollar-denominated value to protect themselves. And this is the first Bitcoin wallet that puts stablecoins front and center with Bitcoin and Bitcoin layers. So let's go to where everything started, in El Salvador in 2021. So they announced that they would do a Bitcoin law at the Bitcoin conference that year. And then September of that year, they made it a reality. And we were engaged with them back when I was at Blockstream to help them deploy this strategy and roll out their Bitcoin initiatives. They also did a number of other things too. They went all in on every single possible avenue of Bitcoin adoption. So they first made Bitcoin as legal tender, and they launched the Chivo wallet that year to accompany this new strategy. And the goal of the Chivo wallet was to allow for people to convert fluidly from dollars to Bitcoin. And for El Salvador, it's a poor country. It was formerly known as the murder capital of the world. A big part of their GDP was remittances. So by adopting a Bitcoin strategy and giving the people a tool to facilitate swaps, they're able to actually keep more money in the country and not have to pay large fees to companies such as Western Union or other facilitators of swaps. I also helped them to design a digital securities law because one of their goals was to become the Singapore of Latin America. So with the digital securities laws, they have the framework both for themselves to launch their own digital securities, but also to host other capital raises and do that from El Salvador. And we've seen them very successfully work with Bitfinex Securities to that end. And finally, Bitcoin bonds were announced at the same time that year. And this was a new financial instrument that I helped to formulate and outline, which is, I think, a really interesting method for the global south and countries in Latin America and in other places to get out of debt, to get out of the stranglehold of the IMF and lenders. And the premise of that is to incur fiat debt backed by a harder asset, which is Bitcoin. And this is really the only way to get out of debt for these countries. El Salvador is also buying 1 Bitcoin daily. And this is very interesting because they published their website. It's bitcoin.gov.sv. So you can go and all of this is verifiable on chain. So you can see a nation state is DCAing. We call that dollar cost averaging and buying Bitcoin steadily, regardless of market conditions or anything else. They're just constantly buying 1 Bitcoin every single day and stacking sats. And this is data from just a year after they launched their Bitcoin strategy. But you can see El Salvador has grown massively, and they've seen a wave of prosperity with tourism growing, GDP growing, employment up, and also investments in the country as well. But I would say the most important indicator is people know where El Salvador is now, whereas previously they may not have been able to point it out on a map. So why are nation states interested in Bitcoin? And I think this has to do with the realization of countries on what money is. They're understanding there are problems in the world today, and they are beginning to take action to that end to address it. So the US dollar is losing purchasing power every year, and this is not good. Companies are also realizing this too, and now you have the MicroStrategy play, which I'll get into in a bit. But Bitcoin is effectively a new world reserve currency that is becoming a reality day by day and accelerating even faster. You can say you could protect yourselves by investing in equities, but as we've seen over the last 2 days, equities are very volatile. But this chart here is an interesting one. When I was structuring the Bitcoin bonds for El Salvador, I did a projection, and this is 60% median growth of Bitcoin year over year. And the reason why I think 60% is a practical conservative estimate is because we've had 60% median growth for the previous 5 years and other periods before that as well. But you can see in 10 years' time, Bitcoin should be at somewhere around the $3 million mark. So it makes it very plausible that countries investing in Bitcoin and adopting Bitcoin as a strategy would be very well off. And this is just a chart showing the dollar is basically going to zero over a period of 100 years. And it's not easily detectable because it happens very gradually, right? So you have to zoom out and look at everything from a very high level. And this is a chart depicting Bitcoin and competing assets. So you have Bitcoin as the orange line, then you have equities as the blue line. The yellow line is gold. Gold is basically flat, so I wouldn't put money in gold. But equities, it might protect you from inflation, but just barely. But you can see Bitcoin is performing 10x over everything else. And slowly, the world is starting to understand this. And Bitcoin is starting to permeate the TradFi space. So we are now more linked than ever to traditional finance. MicroStrategy kicked this off with corporate-level Bitcoin adoption. They bought, when they first bought, their share price was 146. But MicroStrategy was sort of a zombie company. There were no prospects. But they've boosted their share price. When I made the slides, it was 1,500. Now it's 12. But that's the volatility. But overall, I can see that every country that is adopting a Bitcoin strategy is very successful. And we have more and more examples every day now. So Tesla also adopted a Bitcoin reserve asset strategy. Then we saw, I think Semler was next, or Metaplanet, I forgot which one. Maybe Metaplanet, then Semler Scientific. And recently, Semler bought the dip. They bought $6 million more of Bitcoin today, and they're buying 150 more. MicroStrategy has a new debt issuance coming in, I think, a few weeks, months' time for $2 billion to buy more Bitcoin as well. So these companies have detected a loophole. They can, because they're public companies, they can issue debt to buy Bitcoin, and they're just accelerating that playbook and just repeating. So countries already have Bitcoin in their reserves. People think the US has the most right now, but actually it is China. So you can also see Germany sold all of theirs. They had 49,000 Bitcoin and they sold it all, which is very unfortunate. But the US actually only has 118,000 Bitcoin because 95,000 belongs to Bitfinex, which has to be repaid. So the reality is China is leading the pack in terms of how much Bitcoin they have. And then now you have the corporates coming in. And MicroStrategy, you can see now, overshadows Chinese Bitcoin holdings. And then Tether with 80,000 there, Tesla with 11,000. But all of this is now overshadowed by an even bigger play, which is the US ETFs, which hold 890,000 Bitcoin, which is roughly $50 billion worth of Bitcoin. And this is since January this year. So you can see the rate of accumulation. The game theory is playing out, by which countries, funds, institutions, corporations are all starting to compete now for Bitcoin. And if you look at what's happening and unfolding, there's the direct parallel, which is gold reserves. And in gold, the US does lead. They have 8,000 tons of gold. And then everyone else is trailing behind, which an interesting one is Taiwan with 422 tons. So Taiwan is actually up there, close to the UK. The UK has 310 tons of gold. And I think Taiwan should buy 83,000 Bitcoin because, hear me out, the UK, this is your target. The UK has 310, and then you have 420. That's 33% more. So you should have 33% more Bitcoin than the UK at least, to match your gold reserves. Another important thing, too, is a change in discourse. And I think this has a lot to do with the launch of the ETF, specifically with BlackRock. So previously, there was a lot of FUD about Bitcoin boiling the oceans, consuming too much energy, being bad for the environment. But BlackRock is the largest ESG investor on the planet. And now they are the largest holder of Bitcoin through their ETF. So that has shifted things. But that has reverberated into other regions too, which is politicians now talking about Bitcoin on the world stage. So President Trump was just at Nashville, and he delivered a speech talking about Bitcoin, outlining the need for a strategic Bitcoin reserve, and outlining his plans for that. But we're seeing the embracing of Bitcoin by politicians, by governments, and this is a shift, I think, that has really changed the playing field. So you have the institutionalization of Bitcoin, and now you have the government appreciation and understanding of Bitcoin. So he said, I will ensure that the future of crypto and Bitcoin will be made in the US, not driven overseas. I'll support the right to self-custody for the nation's 50 million crypto holders. He's also said, we want all the remaining Bitcoin to be made in the USA. So you can see there is starting to be a rush, a competition to accumulate Bitcoin. A friend of mine, Robert Kennedy, he's also one of the forerunning candidates for president in the US. He also announced his plan to create a 4 million Bitcoin reserve. And that's larger than what President Trump announced. But this is like 20% of the Bitcoin in the world. And he said he will direct the Treasury to buy 550 a day, which is 100 more than is mined per day. So you can see there's not a lot of Bitcoin left. But this is sort of playing out all over the world. This is my friend Joanna Kotar. She's an MP in the German government. And she has an initiative called Bitcoin im Bundestag to educate the German lawmakers. And I'll be going there in October to speak to the German parliament. You have a libertarian president in Argentina now, President Milei. He's vowed for free competition. So while El Salvador is doing Bitcoin as legal tender, he took a different approach, which is opening up the market. And they've tacitly said you can use Bitcoin. And now things like contracts are being priced in Bitcoin too. So there are many paths to Bitcoin adoption. You don't have to just go by the El Salvador playbook. But deregulation of money is also an increasingly popular one. Another initiative, Bitcoin Policy, my friend Freddie New is running this. They're also pushing the UK government preemptively to not sell their Bitcoin holdings like Germany did. So there's a lot of movement, both at lobbyist levels and at the top levels, to adopt Bitcoin strategies. So just to recap the three main strategies. The first is to buy Bitcoin. That's simple. Buy it, put it in your reserve. The second is to issue a Bitcoin bond, to incur a fiat debt backed by Bitcoin. And this could be 15% or 50%, which I recommend. But this is how you get rid of debt. There is no other way. And then the third is to pass Bitcoin-friendly laws. But that is more challenging because you need to have the ability to pass laws easily. And this is something that President Bukele can do in El Salvador because he has a majority of Congress. But other places, it will be more challenging. So let's go into why Bitcoin is important. Bitcoin is economic prosperity. It is how you get out of the broken fiat system. Bitcoin incentivizes Bitcoin mining. And this plays into the fact that you need energy as a country to develop. There's no such thing as a low energy developed country. So for all the talk of green energy, cutting back everything, the data does not lie. You cannot have low energy and have a decent GDP per capita. It just does not work. Every country that is developed, wealthy, has a lot of energy. And you can see strategically this is playing out too, with ambitions to increase nuclear in the US and in China. And I think this is foreseeing the need for more energy to further develop, not just for Bitcoin mining, which is going to be a key component of grid rebalancing, but also other applications such as AI. Another key thing that people seem to forget is that the legacy financial system stops working during times of strife, so war and conflict. You assume that everything is going to work. You can pay with your credit card, you can send a wire transfer, but if war breaks out, the legacy system just stops working. And you can be off-boarded from the legacy system too. So after the war between Russia and Ukraine, Russia's currency reserves were seized, and they were removed from the SWIFT system. So you can see there is a need for Bitcoin strategically. And historically too, you need money to pay armies, to buy weapons, to buy tanks, to buy drones, everything. This is a picture from Game of Thrones, but I like how realistic they are in terms of warfare. They always talk about funding war. We need coin to pay for the army. We need to go to the Bank of Bravos and borrow. But war is expensive. You can see that from Ukraine and them constantly fundraising. But historically, you can look back too and see lots of examples of wars or battles being lost. The Battle of the Crater in the US in their civil war, and many other examples. The fall of Afghanistan back to the Taliban is because people are not paid, and soldiers simply defect if they're not paid. Another thing is Bitcoin is a solution to economic stagnation. So I'll just give an example of Japan. We've seen yesterday they lost 27% of their stock market due to the unfolding of the yen carry trade. But there are other problems too. Declining population, real estate crisis, inflation, just general economic stagnation. And how do you get out of that? You can't grow out of that. Maybe some industries might be able to help offset that, maybe new industries like AI. But it is very challenging to grow out of that. And this problem is replicated in many other countries, China too. Same exact setup. Declining population, housing, real estate crisis, and stagnation. So the only way out of this is really to adopt a Bitcoin strategy. You need to rebase everything to become based off of Bitcoin. You have to reprice equities in Bitcoin. You have to accumulate Bitcoin and mine Bitcoin. So this is just an example of housing prices in Japan. You can buy a house for less than 1 Bitcoin, much less. But I think this will be more of a problem too, because people have been putting money into real estate to serve as their Bitcoin, at least the previous generations. They're storing assets in real estate to protect their wealth. But now you have Bitcoin to do that, and it is a superior vehicle. The debt landscape is also a big problem. The US debt interest payments are getting close to 1 trillion next year. And that's servicing a debt of 35 trillion. But this is the number most people are kicking around. But the real number of debt in the US is probably closer to 175 with entitlements and pensions and such. So I don't know if you understand, but this is astronomical and unsustainable. And the interest payments are simply going to compound as the problem progresses. And there is no solution to any of these things. The only solution is to gradually or potentially violently switch to Bitcoin. The hope is that the transformation of the financial system can be a gradual one where you rebase to Bitcoin over a period of years, but time is running out. There is not a lot of time left to switch, simply because we've seen there's a massive amount of competition to accumulate Bitcoin. So in closing, Bitcoin is starting to eat the world. All of the fiat currencies are failing. You can think of them as ice cubes or sinking ships. They're all melting or sinking. The US dollar is sinking the slowest because it is the reserve currency of the world now. But reserve currencies do not last forever. They all fail. And all you have to do is go back and look at history. They last roughly 100 years. And this is because they can be corrupted. They're not immutable. They're not decentralized like Bitcoin is. So we have to fix it. Otherwise, you'll just have a new dollar, a new fiat currency. And then you con the population into adopting that, and that fails over the next couple of years, decades gracefully. So in closing, countries that adopt Bitcoin strategy today will have a massive advantage in the future. Thank you very much.